welcome to Pluribus Unum's Fireside Chat. Not as good as FTR's, but hey, it's something. You may be wondering, why is this a podcast? Well, very simply, because why not? As I've stated before, this is sort of supposed to be a remembrance of the history of my online career or whatever, and this is a part of it, I guess. Now, I know that this doesn't necessarily make this an important episode, so I guess if you don't want to watch it, you could just skip this one, I guess. Whatever, you can do whatever you want, it doesn't really matter. I did contemplate switching this episode with the next one, but then that would throw off the schedule, so, might as well just do this one. But like I said, this one isn't necessarily that important, so if anything, just listen to the news stories and then you can bounce if you want. But I guess if you care about, the actual, content, I guess, or whatever, or just want to see funny, cringy moments from the past, this is a good episode to watch. With that out of the way, let's get right into the news. First, we're going to be talking a little bit about Ecuador, because Ecuador just had some elections not that long ago, and those elections are relatively interesting. So what happened is, there was local elections in Ecuador, and not only were there that, but there was also a referendum that was being pushed by the conservative president, which would basically try to make the punitive measures in their country more punitive. And what happened is, he failed on all of his referendums, and the citizen revolution movement, led by former President Rafael Correa, won a lot of people in 9 of the 23 provinces, and won the mayor's office in 60 cities, including the capital and the largest city. Now, this is especially interesting because, if you don't remember, Ecuador actually had, presidential elections not that long ago, and in those elections, as I stated, they nominated a conservative candidate for president. So many people were really wondering, why the heck did the pink tide, and as you notice, there's been this huge pink tide wave in Latin America. So many people have been wondering, why did it skip Ecuador? Well, it turns out it might not have skipped Ecuador, it just might have hit Ecuador later than the rest. There's really not much to say on that regard, so let's move on to another story. It's a really big one and really important, which is why I'm covering it really first. A horrific environmental disaster is happening in Ohio, and you might not have even heard about it. Okay, so you might have, if you're watching this video, you might have heard of it. It is a train derailment that happened last week, which turned into a full-fledged environmental disaster, and has received basically no media coverage except for online pundits. Okay, so last Friday, a train belonging to Norfolk Southern, one of America's leading rail operators, derailed near the Pennsylvania border, leaving what the Associated Press called a mangled and charred mass of boxcars and flames just outside the village of East Palestine, home to about 5,000 people. The crash created a 50-car pileup, half of the train's length. According to Norfolk Southern, a fifth of the cars were carrying hazardous materials. The wreckage proceeded to burn ominously all weekend. By Sunday evening, residents near the train tracks were told to immediately evacuate in a sudden alert from the office of Governor Mark DeWine. He went on to warn, now there is the potential of catastrophic tanker failure, which could cause an explosion with the potential of deadly shrapnel traveling up to a mile. And apparently, a particular cause for concern was 14 giant tankers that were exposed to fire, which contained hundreds of thousands of gallons of vinyl chloride, which was so hazardous that it was banned from spray cans in 1974, and you can die from breathing an extremely high level of vinyl chloride. And I would assume 14 giant tankers is a large amount. And apparently what's going on is that not that long after this happened, it seems that almost immediately, people were trying to say, oh no, it's fine, you can head back home now. But it's doubt, because, it's just very common for this to happen, unfortunately, where people will say, oh, we've cleaned up all of, the major toxic elements in the air and the water and stuff, it's fine now. But then you look further into it and you realize, oh no, wait, it's actually been causing, many, many problems that have just been too small to notice. And in fact, sadly, people will notice them, and then they'll just be like, whoops, asbestos, lead paint, leaded gas stoves. Like, these are things, it's very obvious that they would cause harm in retrospect, but then at the time, people say, oh no, it's fine. And apparently it's gotten to the point where any local reporters that want to talk about the story are actually getting arrested for covering the story, which is complete BS. And if you're any of my listeners and you're in that area and you just didn't notice, I'd advise you to clear out. Or if you feel that you're in a area where you could be threatened, maybe look into it. Let's move on to the next story. So this is a news story that is kind of interesting because it kind of goes into a podcast I talked about previously. And it is the fact that apparently The Intercept reported that there was a violent felon that was paid by the FBI to infiltrate the Denver's racial justice movement. The person in question is Michael Adam Windecker II, who apparently drove around in a hearse filled with guns and very much was active in the Denver Black Lives Matter movement. He was basically this felon who made up this huge story about oh, when I was in the war, I was fighting and training anti-fascist people. And then he would trick some younger activists to letting him sit in, and he'd have a camera strapped onto him, and they'd be like, this is a bit weird. Why do you have a camera strapped on you? And he'd be like, no, you don't understand. It's look, I was in prison, so clearly I'm not a Fed. But then it turns out, no, he was a Fed. He was just fully an obvious Fed, and that's just sad. And he even tried to be he even tried to arise non-suspicion, because he's instead of doing what people who are typically regarded as Feds in this field do, he actually tried to de-escalate them from taking more radical action. Even though I don't necessarily know if it was 100%, but I'd advise you to look into the story yourself. You can look it up. Intercept, Fed, Denver, racial justice. Just to point out, this is a thing that still happens. But again, I don't think it necessarily detracts from the point that I made in my video, because again, these are people that were actually doing something, so naturally there'd be suspicions there. So anyways, now let's move on to the next story. I think this is going to be the biggest recent update for the Chicago mayoral race, because this is another thing that's just interesting about the race. Former Illinois Governor Pat Quinn endorses Jesus Chuy Garcia for mayor. He also picked up another endorsement. I don't know if I've said it before, but it's Mike Quigley, who is basically one of the centrist type Democrats. And it's both of these people are sort of the same establishment centrist type wing of the Democratic Party, and they're endorsing Chuy. They're making it very clear that they support Chuy Garcia for mayor. And that's weird, especially considering some of them, their endorsements don't even make sense if you know their ideological leanings. So this again ties on a point that a lot of Chicago progressive activists have been making. The idea that Chuy is starting to drift away from the Chicago progressive movement and is instead shifting into the arms of a more establishment type candidate. And I find it interesting because this is in the lead up to the election, obviously, because the election is not that far away. So we're starting to see a lot of the divides come more frequently. You see, because this shakeup, I don't even know if this is necessarily a shakeup, but it's this could inevitably, I don't even know how to word this right. So what I'm trying to say is the way the election is going to pan out is going to be very interesting, which is a word I use a lot. So basically, for those who don't necessarily understand Chicago politics, it basically is in two major divides. You have the candidate that is basically aligned a lot more with the establishment, and then you have candidates that are run basically more along the lines of the populists. On one side, basically one of the major divides in Chicago politics is the Chicago machine versus the anti-Chicago machine. And the Chicago machine side, you'd put people like Lori Lightfoot or Paul Vallas, but then people who are not machine politicians would be someone like Chuy Garcia, Jamal Green, Brandon Johnson, and even to a degree Willie Wilson. But then there's also the ideological divide, which is a little bit different. It's basically similar, except you would put Wilson alongside Lightfoot and Wallace. And basically, at this point, we're trying to figure out, like, who is going to be more strategic? Because there are a lot of candidates in the race, and we don't necessarily know if one of the smaller candidates, supporters of them, might chicken out and just vote for one of the larger people. Like Jamal Green voters might be inclined to, like, as election day gets closer, some Jamal Green voters might be inclined to vote for someone like Johnson or Chuy, just to make sure that a progressive will make it to the runoff. We'd have to basically look into who is going to vote for who, and et cetera, et cetera. It's not really that much to say. Like, it's really, at this point, he said, she said, and basically guessing and assuming, so we just have to wait and see. Speaking of things we have to wait and see about, the last news story is something that is it just happened basically out of nowhere. So apparently, the Secretary of Labor in the Biden administration might be leaving his job to become the head of a hockey players union. And due to this, it is leading to a last-minute cabinet shuffling just for this position, I think. I mean, a Biden administration cabinet member, like, just left not long ago. I think it was Ronald McClain. Was that the person who left and then got replaced? Like, but anyways, like, as you can see, there's like a last-minute cabinet reshuffling for the Joe Biden administration, which is kind of a good thing, kind of a bad thing. I guess it would depend on your definitions of both, but bad in one regard is that if Biden is taking the effort to look seriously into his cabinet shuffling, then there's a good chance that he's probably running for another term, which is very unfortunate. But we should look on the fortunate side of things, because apparently a lot of names are being thrown out for potential cabinet positions. Some people who were in position to be the cabinet member last time around, like basically when Biden was first like being elected, there were some people from that era that are being floated as potential cabinet members. Former Deputy Secretary of Labor Seth D. Harris, current Deputy Secretary of Labor Julie Su, former Representative Andy Levin, head of a union Sarah Nelson, and Bernie Sanders have all been floated as potential last-minute cabinet members, but Bernie especially doesn't appear like he will be doing it, because he just got on the help committee, so I doubt that he would join the cabinet in the last minute just so he could do that. He'd probably do it if it was the first term, so he could have a full 4 years to do something. But he's not gonna do it for a last minute cabinet reshuffle, because this is the lame duck candidacy, the lame duck cabinet. This is the one that's not really gonna do anything. But there have been some people who have actually floated their names who are newer people. So let's go over some of them. The first one is the funniest one. Former presidential candidate and former mayor of New York City, Bill de Blasio. And everybody's just no. There's really not much else to say, just no. Another one that is interesting is a representative by the name of Donald Norcross. He's sort of one of those a progressive, quote unquote, union type guys for New Jersey, which, I mean, I guess to a degree could be interesting to see. But there's also Representative Linda Sanchez. I don't really know necessarily why she wants the job. I could be completely wrong, but I don't necessarily see her as a huge labor type person. One person that is interesting is Sean Patrick Maloney, who has been really heavily lobbying the Biden administration to give him this job, which is funny because a lot of people are basically saying no, he doesn't deserve the job. He cost the Democrats the House in the midterms, so he really should not be getting any good paying job. But the most interesting candidate that has been floated, in my opinion, is former Secretary of Labor Robert Reich. Now, the reason is I actually really like Robert Reich. He's a very interesting person, and I think he'd make a good Secretary of Labor, but that's because he has a record of being a good Secretary of Labor. It's literally the most interesting thing, because he actually can point to being Secretary of Labor and all the things that he would do, as Secretary of Labor. And it's even got to the point where Bernie has even suggested that he'd support Robert Reich for Secretary of Labor, essentially bowing out of the race. Realistically, though, Julie Su is probably the one who would probably get the nomination because she's the current Deputy Secretary, and one of the big things that the Biden administration has basically said that he really wants to increase diversity within his cabinet. So if I had to place a guess, I'd say it would either be her or Robert Reich, just for the sake of filling in a slot. With that out of the way, let's move on to the main topic of this video. This is the part where if you are completely uninterested, you can literally just leave right now and nobody would blame you. Because this part really would not interest you in the slightest. It might interest you if you have any idea of like the bigger ideas behind like I don't know, this is just stupid. Like maybe if you just want to know lore about me, I guess. Like how did I get to the point where I wanted to make these videos? And you could see like all the different types of videos that I wanted to make. But again, this one really isn't that important in the grand scheme of things. The next one will probably be way more important. And another interesting thing is that if this one actually does really, really, really well, I mean, this could have some interesting things because I actually do have one big thing. I don't know if I should share it because I don't know how I'm going to share it, really. But depending on the ones that I'll say here, there could actually be things that I've done to actually somewhat get closer to making the thing. And like none of them are really like that big. It's mostly just going to be like drawings from like child me. And I do have them saved on my phone with the idea of putting them on like the Patreon at least. Like that'll be like the thing to get people to support my Patreon. Like if you want to see these drawings, like some of the ideas that I have here, sub to the Patreon. It'll be on the Patreon at one point. Maybe not this week because I literally just remembered that this was the video that I was going to be making like this week. So I probably should have used that as the idea to put them on the Patreon. But I already like posted a thing to like solidify the next video. But either way, let's just get into the topic at this point. So, for those who have no clue, I have legitimately wanted to make YouTube videos for a long time. At the very least, since I was like 8, 9, maybe 10. You see, some of these are rather fuzzy. I don't necessarily remember like all of the ins and outs of wanting to do all this. You see, because a lot of it was literally a long time ago. And if I had any idea how to do any of the things that I wanted to do, I would do it. Like, and that was basically because I wanted to do something in the creative field for a longer time. Like, ever since like I was 5, I wanted to be like a film director. But then it sort of just graduated to like basically anything in the creative field. Like, for example, I really wouldn't want to do movies. If I were to do like something like that, I would probably do a TV show rather than a movie because you would have like the ability to have more time to tell your story. So basically, I really wanted to do something on like in the creative field on the internet. Like, I did want to be like a YouTuber, but like I didn't necessarily just want to be a YouTuber. I wanted to be like a little bit more than just a YouTuber. But I did think, okay, YouTube would be like at least the primary thing. I don't know if I like wanted, because this was also around the time where like people had like their own websites to do things, like, you know, that guy with the glasses.com, Screw Attack, other things. You know, that's the only reason why I have like an actual like Weebly page, because, you know, you're supposed to have a website. That's what the thing you're supposed to have. Like, even if you post basically exclusively on YouTube, you gotta have a website. And I was like an imaginative kid, so I like went really, well, imaginative, sort of. I had like really high hopes, but as we get into some of the things that I wanted to do and / did do, you will see some interesting things, and I will abundantly explain a lot of it when I get into it. So I guess let's just deliberate long enough. Let's get into like what the things that I actually did want to do, because I actually do remember a lot of the things that I actually did want to do. So the first thing that I wanted to do for like a YouTube channel presence was something called Pokebros. Let's take a wild guess what the subject of this channel was supposed to be. Okay, so basically, after watching a PokeTuber, a YouTuber that does videos on Pokemon named Jay Witz, I basically went, I wanted to do that. And I wanted to make Pokemon related videos. As the name suggests, I was going to do it with my brother, because he was/is a Pokemon nerd as well. I couldn't have been like younger than 11 when I did this, because I think 11 was when I really got into Pokemon. So I had to be like 11 at the very least. And you see, it was always going to be sort of like in like the style of like a criticism, like a thing that's just like an interesting subject. Like, I wanted to talk about like the banned episodes, or like interesting lore about the Pokemon universe, controversy surrounding the anime, the shipping wars, whatever. But I'd intersperse it with like other things related to the Pokemon universe, and then I would like add ideas that would be from other YouTubers. Like, one thing I had in my mind was a series called Poke Battle, which is basically a ripoff of Smosh's Food Battle, where me and my brother would take the Pokemon that we regarded as our favorite and then have them do like all the like stupid tasks that you do for a food battle. Like, I mean, I just started rambling to the point where it's like, I don't even know if any of you know what Smosh or Food Battle is. The TLDR was Smosh was one of the biggest YouTube channels for a while that basically they were like a sketch comedy channel, and one of the things that they did every year was something called a food battle, where they would take their two favorite foods and then have them do like things to prove that they're the best food. And it would be like, let's see if your food can be air floaties, and then it wouldn't work, and one of them would like viciously drown. So it was basically something like that. We would have the Pokemon do things like that, and they would fail. But then I also wanted to just evolve it to be more of like a game theory type thing, and, you know, talk about like video games in general, particularly the Nintendo stuff, because that was what I was into, which is eventually what Jay Witz did. I remember that being a really big deal on his channel, where it was like he was just going to move on to be a generic Nintendo YouTuber, and everyone was like, oh. Actually, I don't even necessarily think if it was that big of a deal. I think I was the only person who made a big deal out of it. And it eventually evolved to have like the entire game theorist brand. And I think one thing I should mention is that one of my the Pokemon that I chose as my favorite was the Pokemon called Graveler, which was the evolved form of Geodude. And really the only reason why I chose him was because of the infamous error in the Pokerap where they play Graveler and then it actually shows a picture of a Geodude. But what is interesting is that actually evolved into another thing, a show called Gaming Graveler. And it was a ripoff of one of the game theorists' side shows called Game Exchange by the YouTuber Gaijin Goomba, which is basically this weeb who uses a like Goomba avatar to talk about like Japanese stuff within video games. It was an interesting show, and, you know, I was like, okay, I think I could work with this. Like I said, it was originally going to be like a side thing because I wanted to just blatantly rip off game theory, but then, you know, I just thought maybe I should just make this the full project since I'm focusing a lot more on this. I didn't end up doing anything with it because in order to do anything regarding it, I would have to learn how to animate. Well, I mean, not even really animate. I'd have to learn like, but it was again like, I had to learn how to quote unquote animate, and even that kind of stuff was just a little too much for like my little 12-year-old brain, I guess. I even developed a nice little thing of lore where like instead of the Fumon, which was basically like the anti-Japanese enemies of Gaijin Goomba, I would have a side character that was an evil Tyrogue. Why? I don't know. I even brainstormed the design that I wanted to use for the Gaming Graveler. It would be one of his hands would have like the Power Glove, one of his hands would have like the Ash Ketchum Glove, and then he'd have like a sword that like the hilt was a NES controller, and he could like make it longer and wider based on like certain things. And the A and B buttons, I don't know what they would do. I even went so far as thinking I could make a video game about this. Cool. You can definitely do that. I'm sure that there won't be any legal troubles with Nintendo at any point regarding this video game. I legitimately thought that this little thing that was literally a ripoff of someone else's show was going to be so big that I would get like crossovers with the freaking Angry Video Game and a Nostalgia Critic. And the last thing that sort of ties into this like little like section is basically something called Kablooey. Now this was actually the one that was kind of the closest to happening. So basically, my older sister wanted to do a Let's Play channel because it was 2010, 2011, 2012. It was an era that you could literally just do a Let's Play channel. You would like basically be a millionaire. Now, I was thinking in my head that I could use this to like kickstart or like be part of like the Gaming Graveler thing, because Gaming Graveler, like Gaijin Goomba, the real Gaijin Goomba who I stole the idea from, he also had a Let's Play channel, so I could use that to like, I could just steal that. Like, I'm starting to notice a lot of trends. Even though I'm imaginative, I couldn't imagine an original idea. Now, what's interesting is that this one was actually the closest one to actually happening, and that's only because we actually did record one Let's Play channel, like one Let's Play thing, and by do it, that I mean like she basically had me take out my phone and record the screen while they played Kirby's Epic Yarn. But the thing is, like, right after we were done, like, she said something to me and I got really mad, so I deleted it. So, thankfully, that one is lost to time. Now, this next one is interesting because this is actually, quote-unquote, one of my more original ideas. It's technically not, but technically is, and you'll see why in a second. You see, basically, it was something called We Are Stoners. It was basically a stoner comedy web cartoon idea that I had. I partially brainstormed it with my friends, but on the most part, I basically thought of like basically everything. Like, I thought of the characters, I thought of like some of the episode plot lines. There were some ideas that they contributed, but it was like mostly a me thing. Basically, what it was I merged 3 shows. I merged Family Guy, South Park, and a little bit of Rick and Morty. And this is sort of still kind of my philosophy in regards to like ripping off stuff. And you saw this with like the older ideas that I had, but it was like, basically, if you take enough influence from like other people and take all of these influences from all these different areas, and then eventually you merge them together, what's essentially going to happen is that you're going to merge your own ideas with it. But be very clear, like, don't rip off something and then make something based on that alone. Like, you're supposed to brainstorm all the stuff to get, like, the them out of the idea and then the you in the idea before you actually start doing stuff with it. Now, the thing is, this was sort of, like, this was weirdly, like, I don't even necessarily know, like, because the way I thought of it, it was basically like a TV show, but I just wanted to put it online because I didn't want to, like, go through all the hassle of, like, working through networks and all that stuff. Like, even as a kid, I knew that was probably not a good idea. And, like, the thing is, like, even though, like, it was a crappy idea, I, like, went really hard on the idea. Like, I thought of characters, I thought of how the characters would interact with each other, I thought of, like, I had plot lines that I just, like, had in my head that I wanted to do, like, things, like, I thought of, like, twists and turns that just were never going, that just other people would never even know. And it wasn't just going to be like the, you know, the adult comedy thing, like, haha, sex, violence, boobies, you know, that kind of stuff. It wasn't just going to be that. It was going to feature some of it, yes, but it also was going to be, like I mentioned, Rick and Morty was put in one of the influences, and so was South Park. And the thing is, both of those shows, even though they are known for, like, their wacky, crazy moments, at the very least, for Rick and Morty early on, and I don't know necessarily how South Park does with this nowadays, but at some points during South Park, they were, like, very, like, oh, this is actually, like, a really serious moment. And this show was going to feature certain moments like that as well. For example, one of the main characters was going to be a Mexican drug lord, and he was going to be, like, he was going to wear, like a luchador mask, and taking influence from Family Guy, like, he was going to be, like, a Quagmire type character. He would be really good at sex, and to the point where he had, like, tons of children all across the world. And that would be an occasional running gag where it would be like, oh, like, this person's a son of his, or, like, also, like, jokes and, like, oh, he has a cousin or something, because, like, get it, he's Mexican. Mexican families are big. But in like one of the earliest episodes, I think it was going to be like one of those things where it was like the first 10 episodes were going to set up like the first 10 characters of the show. Because I literally had like a huge cast of characters as well that were going to be like part of the main cast. I couldn't go over them all now. I don't necessarily know if I will. But like it was going to be like the first episode was going to feature like it was going to feature like this dynamic. I don't want to necessarily go over like, I will go over like the character dynamics that I did definitively know I wanted to include. There were going to be the two main stoner characters. There was going to be like a third character who was sort of like the voice of reason, who would be played by me, sort of like the Brian Griffin, or like just again like the like voice of reason to all the other characters' wackiness. Then there'd be like this, she would be like the only female character would be like a meth, like she was gonna be a meth head. But the thing is, she would actually sober up very fast. And one of her quirk was that she was gonna like be methed out like in one eye, and then like in the first episode that you meet her, she stabs her eye out, and then that basically gets her to get off of meth. Throughout all of this, I just realized it wasn't gonna be meth; it was gonna be shrooms. I should also mention this: I've never taken any of the substances in this thing. This was all basically going off of like what other people in the media said. Like we'd be like, "Whoa, dude, I feel so weird," like that kind of stuff. And the fifth character would be this El Macho type, like the Mexican drug lord type guy. The next character was going to be like this hippie from the 70s. That would basically be like a reference to sort of like older hippie type characters. Like this would be they would be the classic stoner comedy character, and then these guys would be the newer types. And one of the characters would be like this, like, and there were two characters that were slated to be like younger people, like people who were like actually around my age, because all these characters are adults, even though I was like 12 when I made this series. So like there'd be characters that were actually like close to my age range, one of which was going to be this like little gay kid that was going to have a crush on one of the two main stoner characters, and they would not reciprocate at all for various reasons. And he'd basically be the butt of a lot of gay jokes, but he would basically be the best friend of like this other character, which this whole segment was supposed to be about, but I rambled so much so about the concept. This last character was going to be one of the children to Al Macho, who is left on the doorstep in one of the episodes, and is like, he's again 12, like he doesn't necessarily need, like he of course needs him to basically look after him for like until he's old enough to get like a job and whatever, but like he was basically another voice of reason character. And the whole point was that there would be this little arc of like him and El Macho basically learning on how to like be with each other, because it's like this character grew up without a dad, and then this guy didn't have any responsibilities, and it would be revealed that El Macho, his father, also walked down on him, and there'd be like a subplot about that. I had a friend who basically also wanted to have a self-insert character, of a character with a dual personality disorder, which they're basically ripping off from like Total Drama. And they also wanted to do a thing where it was like two characters are like one of the characters becomes feral, which is again a ripoff of Total Drama. I didn't really care that much about that character. That was basically one that would just be written out basically as soon as as soon as he disappeared, I wouldn't really care about that character. But there were slated to be dramatic moments, like spoiler alert for this idea that will never happen. The hippie character was going to at one point be killed. It was gonna be like it was gonna be like one of those like, oh, they died at the end of the episode and they come back the next one. Like, no, it was gonna be like permadeath. As I mentioned before, there was gonna be like arcs about like characters like, doing drama. I even intended for there to be a movie where it was gonna be like this big dramatic plotline that would serve as a kind of finale, but also kind of not a finale. I could really go on and on and on and on about this idea, but it's like there's basically no reason to, because it was just like, this was just some idea some random middle school kid that thought would be interesting to do. But it was like, again, there was really nothing I could have done, because in order to do any of this, I would have had to learn how to animate, I would have had to learn to voice act, I would have had to done more research into actually knowing what some of this stuff would actually do to you. I would have to hire a lot of people. Like, I was literally thinking TV show production on the internet, and it was just this funny thing I thought would be hilarious. The next thing I thought would be hilarious is something very the title is going to catch your attention. It's called The Racist Rangers. Now, this is the weirdest part. It's a ripoff of a ripoff. Okay, so it was a parody of the Power Rangers, but it wasn't. It was actually a parody of Power Rangers, which was Kerbifer's Super Freaking Parody Rangers. There were some really dumb additions that I made that were just... I do not understand why these changes were made. Like, the Blue Ranger was going to be a victim of colloidal silver. For those who don't know what that is, it was a factoid that I saw in a map video where it's like, there was a particular silver thing that was in a lot of people's water, and if you drink it enough times, your skin turns blue. And he was going to have blue skin, even though there was literally no point in that at all. I didn't even have to explain it. It would be an idea of a stupid like web animation. I wouldn't have needed to include it all. Like in the Super Freaking Parody Rangers, one of the characters, he just has 2 flails, like maces for arms, and it's not explained until like basically the finale of the series. And it wasn't really needed at all. Like, nobody cared. Like, I was just like, oh yeah, he just has maces for arms. One thing that was a bit more ambitious is that I actually, like, thought of, like, a 3-season, quote-unquote, thing where it would be, like, first they would rip off the Mighty Morphin Power Rangers, and then they'd rip off the, Zeo, and then they'd rip off, Turbo. But the thing is, for the Mighty Morphin one, of course, since that's called the Racist Rangers, the costumes were going to be racist looking. The Red Ranger's costume was going to feature like a feathered headdress, like as a chief, and his weapon would be a tomahawk. The Asian character's costume was going to be a kimono, and you know, that's not necessarily too bad. That's what the freaking, like, that's what Kerbifer did in his one. The Black Ranger, I'm not even going to continue that sentence. This is where the cringiness is. This is where the cringiness is. Oh boy. It's the only one that I could really, like, the last one I can go in depth on because it's mocking my own race. The last Ranger, which is supposed to be the Green Ranger, I actually changed completely what the Ranger was. You see, I changed it so that instead of the Green Ranger, he would be the Mexican Ranger. And he would have a green helmet, a white, like body, and then he would have red pants. And his symbol would, of course, be like the eagle and the snake from the Mexican flag. But also, his, like, the dragon flute and the dragon dagger would essentially become a maraca. Oh yeah, and I forgot to mention, instead of, like, the dragon shield that is on his body, he would instead have a poncho and a sombrero on his head. But the thing is, like, as I thought of the idea, I actually started taking it a little bit more seriously, even though it was still supposed to be a parody, to the point where by the Turbo parody, it wasn't really even a parody anymore. Sub to the Patreon and you'll at one point probably get pictures of the drawings that I made of all of these character designs. And some of these are actually interesting because I think they would actually make good, interesting character designs for the future. The next idea I'm going to go into is one that I can't really go into as much because it sort of has kind of evolved a little bit. It's not really like that much good, but it's like basically the idea was going to be kind of good, but it's like other people have the idea as well, but also not necessarily the way I wanted to do it, but also I've refined it a little bit to make it better, more palatable. So basically what's going on. The one in question is Captain N. So for those who don't know what Captain N is, Captain N the Game Master was this really bad 80s show that was made to promote a lot of Nintendo products. Basically, there was this kid named Kevin Keane who jumps into Videoland, and he has to work with Mega Man and Simon Belmont and Kid Icarus, and also a character named what's her name? Princess Lana. And then eventually in the second season, a Game Boy. And they would basically have to fight like bad video game characters and, wacky adventures of the day. The problem was, for the 80s, it was really good. But, when you compare an 80s show to nowadays, you realize it's actually not that good. In fact, it is actually quite bad. And like many people, after watching the Nostalgia Critic episode of it, I was thinking I could do a better job on this. Especially considering the gaming landscape has changed so much so from the 80s to now that we could really see a vast improvement for the idea. And I basically decided to take a lot of the elements from the shows that I was watching around the time, sort of like the Steven Universe type shows, Star Versus before it got really bad, like this sort of action style type shows with some elements of like a deeper lore, like deeper backstory. Like there was one episode idea that I had where it would be like, it would reveal like how did this video game land even come to existence? We'd get like backstory to like certain characters that didn't really need that many backstories. There would be references to like old like shows, like old things. Like there would be a reference, like maybe a character would pull out like a Game Boy and be like, this is weird. Kevin, you should have this. And he's just like, this is stupid. And then he throws it away. And it's like a reference to how Game Boy being a main character on the show is kind of stupid. And he would be replaced with Rob the Robot because that would make much more sense as a character in the show. And the reason why it was the original idea as a concept for like the internet, because it was like, there would be a lot of legal troubles for a lot of ideas that I had, because I planned to include elements of Atari, PlayStation, Xbox, and Sega. I even plan to use some of the original cast, like Simon Belmont and Mega Man, because they were extremely poorly used in the original show. Simon Belmont and Mega Man basically act nothing like they would in their actual characters. So I thought I could use them and make them better. There would sort of be twist villains, but it wouldn't be like, like, oh, this good character was actually a bad guy the whole time. But it would instead be more like, oh, the villain of the show is actually this person? That's interesting. Now, I'm not going to go too much in depth as far as I have currently, because again, I did like sort of revamp the idea to maybe be a good concept for like actually moving forward with the Nintendo idea. Like basically I removed some of the characters that would be problematic to include that were non-Nintendo good, and now I've thought of better ones. Maybe I'll make an episode where I talk about ideas for like shows and concepts. That will probably never happen because I'll never be able to get to the point where I can pitch these shows and ideas. But whatever. Okay, so the next idea I had is something called the Stick Figure Show. It wasn't really necessarily a show with a name. Basically, it was a ripoff of an animated series on the internet called Dick Figures. For those who don't know what that is, it was basically a red and blue stick figure that basically went around and did like funny things, but this one was going to have a twist. I was going to include 3. It was basically just some random idea I had. I didn't really go too far with the concept, so whatever. But the last one I had was basically the biggest idea that I had, the one that I didn't, the last biggest one that I actually never ended up doing, that in retrospect, that even to this day, I still think, this would have kind of been interesting to do. And it's something called Hyperdrive. Hyperdrive was slated to be my ripoff of Channel Awesome. For those who don't know what that is, Channel Awesome is a web collective, or kind of was a web collective. Its status nowadays is kind of interesting, but it was a web collective of like a bunch of people who were like internet reviewers, people who would like look at a movie, TV show, video game, comic book, or whatever, make this recap with like slight critiques, and then slap something at the end that was basically like, this is good or bad or whatever. And then they would just post that and basically go, this is my critical analysis of the show or movie or video game. As a person who was and still is a huge nerd over the Nostalgia Critic, I wanted to do that too. And this is one that I was really, really, really close on doing. I just never found the right time or effort to actually do certain things. Now, first, one of the interesting things is that Doug Walker actually had multiple shows that he did on Channel Awesome. He didn't just do The Nostalgia Critic, but The Nostalgia Critic was the thing that ended up clicking. And basically, one of the things that I wanted to do was do some of the things that Doug was doing and have multiple shows that would be interesting for people to watch. So the first show is one that's a ripoff of one of Doug's lesser shows, but is one that does kind of work. Like, it's one that I'm actually kind of mad that Doug hasn't done more with, because it's actually kind of an interesting idea, but it's like also kind of a boring idea. So, Video Game Confessions, for those who don't know, is, well, I mean, a lot of you probably don't know that one. Even if you know the Nostalgia Critic, you probably don't know what Video Game Confessions is. It was a show where Doug played a bartender in a video game bar called the Pixel Palace, and what he would do was basically he would tell a story of a video game character who basically would go to the bartender and just spill whatever beans they had. So, like, it was basically something along, like, it would be like Mario comes in and is like, hey, Peach really likes to, go with Bowser. I'm starting to worry that she might be cheating on me. Now, this was one, again, it was an interesting concept that I really liked and thought that maybe could work even in different settings. This kind of concept could work. The idea that I had would be that I would play a news reporter, later a detective, named Danny, who lives in the video game world, and basically I would be tasked with investigating some very prominent internet jokes and fan theories, exposing the truth of the video game world. Mario's a communist, Mario's abusive, Link was secretly gay, etc. And it was even a one-off gag because of something I saw on the Gaijin Goomba channel, because Gaijin Goomba, he did a thing where it was like International Goomba Day, where he did like a Goomba PSA of like, oh, Mario's actually the bad guy because he stomps on the Goombas who are just doing their jobs or whatever. And I had an idea where it was like, this Danny character would have a Goomba friend who joined Bowser's army because he was like drafted or something, and it would be like best friends, and I'd have like a shark tooth necklace that I would claim would be of this Goomba character's tooth, and that this was the reason why he commonly would attack Mario. The next one was probably the most basic one. It was called El Contestador. The idea would basically just be me ripping off Ask That Guy with the Glasses. Like, basically that was it. The closest thing that would be interesting would be like, I planned for the 100th episode to be a thing where it's like, I ripped off another prominent online creator named the Blockbuster Buster, where I would do a thing where it's like the question would be, do you have a question? And then instead of actually asking a question, I would spend the whole episode trying to figure out if I could find a question. But lastly and most prominently, for the show ideas I had, was the biggest one was the Angry Mechs. The Angry Mechs would be my reviewer persona, where I would review mostly movies, TV shows, occasionally video games, but also I would do like rants. Like I basically did the thing of the Nostalgia Critic again, where it was like 1 week it would be a movie review, and then next week it would be like a rant. Like, instead of like a formal like movie review, it would be a rant. Much like how the Nostalgia Critic, it was like originally for like the immediate aftermath of like the Nostalgia Critic, it would be like he would do a movie review, and then the next week it would be an editorial. And I even had things in mind for like some of the first and like prominent reviews that I would do. Like, I planned ahead, kind of. Okay, so the first one that I wanted to do would be like the first review that I would do would be of Diary of a Wimpy Kid Roger Rules. And that would be because that was one of the movies I have in my movie collection. And it would basically be the thing where it's like, I look at this movie and like, I'm basically like, even though the movie isn't that bad, honestly, it's like, I would make it like the big, like, oh, big bad. And then the second movie review that I wanted to do would be The Tooth Fairy, which is one that I still maintain is really, really bad. Which, again, I also have it in my collection. In fact, in retrospect, I probably should have had that one be my first review. But I think the only reason why I only wanted to do the Die of Wimpy Kid one because there was like other Die of Wimpy Kid movies that I could review to do like anniversary specials or whatever. The third one I wanted to do would be a movie review of Kung Pao, which is a really dumb movie. It was like, it's not that bad. I mean, it might be a little bit, but it's like, it's one of those movies that's like, it's kind of so bad it's good. It's basically, there's this Asian movie that was dubbed and like reshot some scenes with like parody-ish moments. There was one episode that I was going to do where I was going to look over like the entire history of SpongeBob SquarePants, because that was in the time where SpongeBob SquarePants was really being really bad, and it was like I wanted to like make it known that this was like an abomination of what SpongeBob used to be. I just wanted to do like collections of like, oh, this is me reviewing every single Spider-Man show, or this is me reviewing every single Sonic show, or me reviewing every single what are some other ones I want to do? I don't know. There was this one idea that where it was like I was going to take like I was gonna do like a thing where it's like, I don't remember if any of you know this, because it was like there was this series where it was like Suede. That person's like completely irrelevant on channel also, but like there was this reviewer called Suede, one reviewer called Linkara, and one reviewer called Chuy, and then all three of them would get together and review every single Pokemon movie. And I wanted to do that, but for every single Pokemon television season. Now, here's one thing you might be wondering. Did I want to do story arcs like Linkara? Well, yes, person that I'm making up for this scenario. I did want to do story arcs like Linkara. In fact, I had written quite a few story arcs. Okay, well, basically, I had ideas for story arcs. I didn't necessarily write them all completely through. And very much like always, it started off with ripoffs, but then as things went on, I thought of ideas that would be original. For starters, like, it wasn't even that long before I had, like, diverged storylines. You see, the first storyline I wanted to do was basically a ripoff of the Linkara Entity arc, because that was the one I liked the most. But then the immediate next arc would be me tackling the idea of, oh, there's actually, the entity hasn't fully left. It's actually taken over my body, and it's actually something that Linkara would end up doing like way further down the line, but I did it first, so it's good. The other two characters from the shows would also appear like in my series as well. Like, they would appear in this one as well. Like, it would basically be like, oh, they're all living in the same house except for Danny, who lives in like the other video game world, but he always just finds his way to hang out in the place, I guess. And there would also be side characters. One character was the Bakugan character Naga, Naga, which I got off of like a DS Bakugan game. And he was supposed to be like sort of like my Poyo Jacques character, you know, like the funny robot sidekick character. And then there was a character that was a ripoff of the Nostalgia Critics Chester A. Bum character called Fester Z. Bum. Now, there's also another character that I had that it requires a lot of context to explain. Now, you see, one of the jokes that would always go on the Nostalgia Critic would basically be like the idea of like there was this elephant in the room. Like, he would be an elephant that would be in the room that would be like, hey, you should address certain things in this episode. Like, oh, there's this problematic actor or whatever. And I wanted to do something similar to that. And for whatever reason, I was like, I can't do this because I didn't even understand the whole elephant in a room reference. I just knew that this was a character in an elephant. But I was like, I need a character like this. And he's also supposed to be sort of like the douchey McNickpit character. Something like that. But it's like, what do I call him? Like, what is he? I knew what I wanted to do, because I wanted to like have him like how I wanted to have him like he would wear like a bandana and he'd be wearing a black hoodie. But because for all the characters, I was going to like obstruct my face a little bit. Like one character would like wear like glasses. One would wear sunglasses. One would wear a hood over his head. You know, stuff like that. But this character, like he was gonna wear like a bandana over his mouth, and again the black hoodie. So it's like, what do I call him? And the name that I came up with, because I was like, this is hilarious. His name was going to be John Doe, the Sensitive Terrorist. Because I was like, terrorists are the people who are the least sensitive people on the planet. Because that is what I thought would be hilarious. But thankfully, I did evolve that character's name, where instead of calling him that, I would instead change his name to John Doe, the Social Justice Warrior, because as I continued the idea, eventually Antifa came around, and they started wearing the stuff that would basically be associated with this John Doe character. So I was like, oh, easy fix. But wait, there's more. You see, for some ungodly reason, I wanted to have my friends involved with this as well, so I made reviewer personas for some of them too. Thankfully, I never told any of them what I wanted to do, so it was basically just a random thing that came in my head. Okay, so one was going to be called the Gamer. I wonder what was going to be his gimmick. He plays video games, but is gay. Okay, and this one is hilarious. This other one was going to be called Comic Book Comic Book. It's supposed to be a reference to the character Comic Book Guy from The Simpsons. The names were the only things I came up with, and I guess the general concept of the show. But it was because those people were interested in those concepts. Like, the friend for the latter character was very interested in the comic book thing, and the former was a huge gamer. So I was like, okay, this fits. But wait, there is more. You see, I was so ambitious with my idea that I actually had the idea of making 4 movies for this hyperdrive franchise. See, the first one I'll mention is actually kind of, again, interesting. It was going to be a movie revolving around Danny, and it was going to be him searching for the Sword Quest swords. For those who don't know what that is, Sword Quest was this video game from the 80s, from Atari, and it was basically this, not even the Sword Quest swords, the Sword Quest sword and all the other associated items. Basically, it was a contest that was held in the 80s with this game Sword Quest, and it was if a person won one game, they would have a chance to win a prize, and then there were 4 games released in the series, and each game came with a prize if you managed to get a certain part of it through, and then those 4 would come back, and they would have to fight for one more big prize. However, Atari shut down before that final prize was claimed. Well, technically before the final 3 prizes were claimed, but the Sword Quest sword was the one that was the most interesting of them. The first one would be called the Angry Mechs movie, which basically revolved around M. Night Shyamalan cracking down on internet reviewers, and internet reviewers have to go and stop him. Because of all the internet reviewers, I was the one who needed to stop him. The next one would be a sequel to that, which was basically a ripoff of Suburban Nights, where Shyamalan tries to find a magic power and then ends up being the bubble wand from Mylon from the video game Mylon's Secret Castle. These references are so deep that literally nobody gets them. And the third one, see, I never really actually got around to the making, I knew there was going to be a third one because it was 3 Channel Awesome movies, so I had to make 3. But I never really got around to, how it was going to go. All I knew is that Shyamalan was going to be the villain, and that there was going to be a monster involved in it in some capacity. and that monster would be sort of like a reincarnated thing of Mylon. Like, again, I don't really know. I never got around to making any of those ideas. The ones I did end up doing was like a stick figure animation channel that I already talked about. I did sort of have ideas for like other shows on that channel. Like, one thing that I wanted to do that I never got around to was like making the show where one of the characters, where like the main character, it was going to be basically like sort of like an equals 3, but sort of like also like a drama sphere channel where I would basically talk about like all the internet stuff. And it was basically like, oh, he'd be like the keeper of the internet. But it was like, again, I haven't really got around to it. And then, of course, there's this channel, which did sort of plan to have like more series and more like ideas that I never really got to. Like the Everything Is Wrong with Politics series, where I would go over like a political party and then like go over all of its flaws. I also wanted to do like sketches and like other kind of stuff that would be a little bit more in depth than just this. I wanted this to be a part of it as well, but I did have like more ideas with it, but I didn't really do them because, again, I just never really did, because some of them would also require me being on camera, and I was like, no, none of that. So anyways, that's pretty much all I have to say on all this topic. If you actually managed to watch this one, congratulations, you're a real trooper. Thanks for watching this video. Be sure to like, comment, share, and subscribe, and click that bell to be notified when a future video of mine comes out. And if you're some more content from me, you can go on my website, follow me on Twitter, join my Discord, or consider supporting me on Patreon.